music. You are now entering a parallel universe.
And wipe your feet on the way in.
Marc,
BBC Six Music.
Every single performance on that record is magnificent. I'm Mark Riley, and Bobby Hughes is wagging his finger at me all the way from Yorkshire.
Do you know, I was just going to say the same thing. It's one of those records, everybody's on top form, aren't they? I know we've talked about Will being a great player, but I mean, what a drum pattern that is. And Les, that racing bass line underneath, just
so
just
melodic,
brilliant.
and obviously Marc, just one of the best voices.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a regal record, absolutely. So that was Echo and the Bunnymen, The Back of Love. Talking of regal, it's Bob.
Oh, mate, too kind.
Hey.
We're looking at sounds here, 3rd of April 1982. I know we've said this before, but particularly this issue is at times quite an uneasy mix of oi and metal and post-punk and pop. It's like they're trying to cram everything in there. And the oi element is still so strong at this point, early 80s, that there's a bit of chafing going on, which we might get to later, actually.
Do you know, so if you're looking at the three different component parts that you're talking about, you've got Gary Bushell who championed oi, you've got Dave McCulloch who championed the likes of Joy Division, The Fall and all that kind of stuff. And Jeff, who was it who used to
Jeff
do...
Barton. Jeff Barton used to do the metal stuff.
New Warbum.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So it's all going on. And on the cover, you got the birthday party, Nick Cave and Roland Howard. More of them later. In the news, you got Patti Smith has announced she's going to begin to release some of the work she's taped with her husband, Fred Sonic Smith, since her retirement to Domesticity in the Detroit suburbs 2 years ago. Most of the work was done with Fred's Sonic Rendezvous Band. The SRB, who appeared in Britain several years ago as Iggy Pop's backing group, incorporated veterans of the same Detroit scene, which made Smith famous as one of the MC5. Obviously, Patti Smith had been around. Not to be confused, of course, Fred Smith was Fred Smith from Blondie and television.
Absolutely.
Ronnie, who's just released a new single on Polydor, plays her first headlining concert at London's Old Vic next week. She intends to conjure up the atmosphere of Berlin or Paris in the 30s, according to her manager. She's lined up former Buggles keyboard player Hans Zimmer and Ultravox drummer Warren Cann to play with her, as well as a surprise guest star with whom she's recently been recording. The support acts will include a theatre group and a magician. Okay, so I hadn't heard of Ronnie, so this is a new one to me, but she was Parisian.
Right.
She was discovered a model, a singer and a dancer. She was discovered in a Parisian nightclub by Rusty Egan, and then she became one of the sort of prime movers of the Blitz Club. So she was a Blitz kid in the end.
Okay, see, when you were rattling on there, no offence, about Ronnie, I thought, who's this Ronnie? He's talking like I should know. And then I think, it's not Ronnie Spector, is it? It can't be Ronnie.
I thought you might have thought it was Ronnie Corbett.
Oh, no. Good target audience reference there, Bob. Thanks for that.
Well, one of the reasons for mentioning that story as well, obviously, Hans Zimmer, who's now probably the most, the hottest soundtrack composer in the world, on the planet, started off with Jeff Downes and Trevor Horn in Buggles, didn't he? That was his sort of entry.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Right. Mind you, I'm not a massive Buggles fan, so maybe I wouldn't, but anyway.
Fair dues. Also in the news, The Clash have lined up a 4-week British tour starting towards the end of this month. They have a new single out called Know Your Rights, released by CBS to coincide with the dates. There's also a new album in the pipeline, but details about whether it's a quadruple selling for the price of a single or a single album selling for the price of a box set haven't yet been divulged. That's a bit sarky. Obviously,
is.
a bit of a Sandinista snipe.
They're only trying to be nice.
Yeah. And the album, of course, Combat Rock, wasn't it?
Know Your Rights is a great tune.
It is. It's brilliant. It's a great way to start. The Blasters, a Los Angeles five-piece, have been building up a following on the West Coast and wrote Marie Marie for Shakin' Stevens last year, which I didn't realise.
No.
Will be coming over for their first British visit at the beginning of May when they guest with Nick Lowe on his tour. The band are led by Phil Alvin on guitar, harmonica and vocals, and Dave Alvin on lead guitar. Dave Alvin now, of course, is just one of these sort of venerated figures of Americana, isn't he? Sort of a roots music legend.
A great player. Did you ever see the Blasters? Because they were supposed to be great live.
No, I never saw them, sadly.
Right.
But, never. Did you see them?
No, I didn't.
They were just one of those bands that were like a lot of the West Coast bands, who were sort of combining rock and roll, rockabilly with punk, making something that wasn't really punk, but was derived from it.
Well, like the band X, which had Billy Zoom on guitar, who played with Gene Vincent previously and stuff like that.
That's right, yeah. So Boys Brigade, featuring David Boys, who already has a reputation around London's drinking establishments for wearing a variety of plastic raincoats, released their first single this week called You Bring Out the Vicar in Me. So this doesn't mean a thing to me at all, okay? But it turns out so I needed to find out what this was. It turns out it was a one-off project led by a guy called Dave Skillin, who'd been the lead singer of a prog band called Aardvark.
You're making this up
Diram
again,
label.
Bob, aren't you? Thin week.
It was sort of self-education, really, Mark.
You bring out the vicar in me.
Yeah, that was a single.
Right.
Yeah, it's not great. I had to play it this afternoon.
Right.
But talking of prog, it's an entry into this. Talking of prog, Marillion, the highly visual progressive rock band who are on the verge of signing a record deal, set out on their biggest British tour to date, a 2-month trek around the clubs and colleges. The band have already released their own cassette and have been recording more songs, which will emerge either on another cassette or their debut album. Have rehearsed a new stage act for the tour, which starts at Coventry General Wolfe on April the 2nd. So this is the second coming of prog, whether it was it was welcomed in some quarters.
It was. It seemed very unlikely at the time, didn't it? Because all the old cliches about, punk had to happen because of prog and whatever, this, that and the other. And then you've gone through punk and then post-punk, and now you're getting into the new romantic kind of thing. And then there's Marillion with all the black and white makeup on Fish, this ginormous guy and that. And it just seemed very unlikely at the time, didn't it?
It did, definitely. And obviously, of course, all the Genesis comparisons are flying about, weren't they? Thick and fast at this point.
They were.
Also bands like Palace as well, and IQ, bands like that.
Yep.
On the singles front, review by Johnny Waller. Single of the week goes to Rudy for Crimson. Just the thing, he says, to put on 5 minutes before you go out. Puts a spring in your step. There's also Simple Minds, The Beat, Haircut 100, and David Bowie's Cat People, which was the Giorgio Moroder collaboration, wasn't it?
It was.
Which wasn't bad at all, but that would be a bit obvious to go there, so we're going somewhere else in the charts.
Since we started the programme with David Bowie anyway, we'd really best nots would be in trouble, wouldn't we? But this is hard to beat anyway. Yeah, this is The Associates and Party Fears 2. Starting off with Echo and the Bunnymen and The Back of Love, and The Associates' Party Fears 2 makes it very unfair on the ensuing records, Bob, but great to hear them nonetheless. I'm Mark Riley, that is Rob Hughes, and we are in the parallel universe.
We are indeed looking at Sound's 3rd of April 1982 here, and sadly this obviously is a visual item, but there's a brilliant rock family tree in the centre pages by Pete Frame, tracing the lineage of Skids, Simple Minds and Ultravox via Slick, The Rich Kids, Visage, Thin Lizzy and Gary Newman. It's just beautifully set out. It's just such a work of art.
I found one of the old Pete Frame books around about a month ago, which is just, the fold-outs, and it's got loads of them. And he also did, bless him, he did the spurious Shire Horses family tree as well, which was all the different, gazebo and poke faces and all that. He did it, but it was a really long, thin strip, and it was an honour to have Pete Frame do that for us. What an absolute star.
Oh, I bet. How wonderful. Okay, so there's 2 lengthy interviews here, which I've tried to pick the bones out of these. The first one is a birthday party by Ralph Traiter, and he says the birthday party in conversation are Roland Howard, slow and quiet, and Nick Cave, slower and distracted, KG, assured, bored, and remarkably obliging in spite of himself. Nick says birthday party will never be as big as the Beatles, which I'd say is a safe assumption, and maybe the only one to be made, especially if, as Nick asserts with a blasé relish, the birthday party could break up at any time. He says, no one has a very optimistic view of what's going to happen to the group. We don't consider ourselves becoming massive. I just think if our past history is anything to go by, we won't be a great success. And they get talking about sort of being on stage. And Nick says he's asked about his attitude to the audience. He says, there's no way you can possibly go on stage and have a pleasant relationship with your audience. I just don't like the crowd mentality. And Roland chips in by saying that some people like to do that with the audience, not us. He says people treat us badly when we're on stage. They sort of take Nick's clothes off and punch him and pull him to the floor and spray him with all sorts of stuff. So you saw the birthday party a few times back in the day.
Yeah, I saw them a couple of years before that, probably. So, but that was at Rafters in Manchester, and we went along not knowing much about them. I don't even know if Elisa Batts was out at that point in time. Might have been, but I do remember we read an interview with the birthday party, and Nick did say that the 2 things that were keeping him going in Melbourne at the time musically was Funhouse by the Stooges and Slates by the Fall. So I thought, well, probably kindred spirits. And they went to see him, and they were just incendiary and brilliant. And that was the gig I had mentioned before, where Nick unscrews a boiling hot spot lamp and throws it into the audience. I just duck, and then it smashed on Steve Hanley's shoulder and shattered everywhere. He'd obviously never heard the phrase "safety first, safety second." But at the end of it, whoever it was, me, Steve, and Craig, I would imagine, just went backstage and said, "Oh, hello, we're from the Fall, and yeah, we thought you were great. Thanks very much." We didn't stay for long, and then we scarpered.
Oh, wonderful, though. I did my homework here as well. So this was around the time, I think maybe a week or so after the birthday party had supported the Fall at Hammersmith Palais. So it was kind of twinned careers for a while there.
Yeah, I think technically speaking, it was probably a double bill, Bob.
Okay.
But we did go on last. And they were incendiary that night, but it was my favourite Fall gig, so I think we were pretty good that night as well.
Oh, fantastic. And the other major piece is on Lou Reed, which is interviewed by Sandy Robertson. Starts off pleasantly enough. This is The Blue Mask is out. Okay, starts off pleasantly enough. And then he realises Sandy Robertson has only been commissioned to do this at the last minute, so he hasn't heard the album. And Lou, understandably, is not very happy about that.
Oh, well, fair enough, eh?
So they don't have a lot to talk about. But anyway, do you know what? So we won't get into it, apart from the fact that we should get on to... Well, we've had 2 great records. Are we going to get on to the third?
We are. We're going to play Killing Joke, an Empire song, which is Fandabadozi. Here we go. Killing Joke and Empire Song. And before I go any further, I just need to say thanks very much to Lewis Reeves, who's been working with us all week and has been great. I'm Mark Riley. I'm not great, but I'm in the company of greatness, which is Bob Hughes.
Great. So we're looking at sounds here, 3rd of April 1982. Just briefly going back to that Lou Reed interview with Sandy Robertson. Because he hadn't heard the album yet, he starts talking about other stuff that he's made.
Right.
He says Metal Machine music he delights in still, writes Sandy, while Rock and Roll Animal he says was bad Velvet Underground. And then we get on to Sally Can't Dance. Lou says, a record that I really couldn't stand. I know people who love that record, but my answer was to make Metal Machine music. Do you understand what I just said? You have no idea what I just said to you. Oh. My answer to having a top 10 record was to put out an album like that, and it descends from therein. And he wasn't the first interviewer to suffer either, was he?
No, tell me about it.
I know. Gigs this week, you've got The Cure at Edinburgh Playhouse, The Chameleons at the Porterhouse in Retford, Haircut 100 at Hammersmith Odeon, The Jam at Sheffield Top Rank, Motorhead at Cardiff Top Rank, The Fall at Night Moves in Glasgow. Do you remember that one?
I do, actually. I think the Fire Engines were on the same bill.
Ah, wow.
I think
double
so.
bill.
Yeah.
Larry Wallace at the Hope and Anchor in Islington. You've got Mike Sweeney and the Salford Jets, the Cheetahs and Chris Seavey's one-man show at Rotters in Manchester. An interesting one because I think the Freshies have just finished, and this is obviously pre-Frank, wasn't it? Frank Sidebottom.
That's right.
Martha Reeves and the Vandellas at Bailey's in Watford. You've got Echo and the Bunnymen at McGonagall's in Dublin. Wilson Pickett, Sam and Dave, Carla Thomas and Eddie Floyd at Brixton Astoria.
Wow.
There's a bill. The Clash at Inverness Ice and Frank Zappa at Hammersmith Odeon. On the live review front, fairly quickly-ish, you've got Motorhead at Hammersmith Odeon by Gary Bushell, mentioned before. He loves it. He says to say the Motorhead gig is a celebration of noise, pure and simple, is such a truism. It's almost a cliche. But no matter how you try and intellectualize, it all comes back to noise. Put simply, Motorhead are the gaffers of gross, which isn't to say the band are always above criticism. There was more sense in Dave McCulloch's stupidly scathing review of Iron Fist than all our rivals' sycophantic drivel put together. Because in a perverse way, he was right. Iron Fist is a good letdown. Its 4 or 5 superb moments are padded out with almost cliched filler. So there you get an idea of the kind of like edge going on in the Sounds office there.
Right.
Begrudgingly giving out praise.
I remember John Peel once said that he'd seen Gary Bushell running through Euston Station as if the Fall were chasing him. That was something that he said, Tom.
I like that very much. Okay.
Okay, mate. So we're done, aren't we?
We are indeed, yeah.
So Gideon is next. We're going to be back on Monday night. On Tuesday night, we've got Quasi in session. A week tonight, we've got Wooloo. I just need to say thanks to everybody involved in the programme and to you, Bob, obviously. And I'll see you next week.
Will do.
All right. Okay, here we go. This is Television Personalities, and I know where Sid Barrett lives. Thanks for listening. Ta-ta.
Prepare to exit the parallel universe.
Marc Riley, BBC 6 Music.
And shut the door on your way out.